Psychotechnologies
Psychotechnologies
Live.
live. Welcome, guys. I'm super excited for this episode. We've got Stephen
Zerfas. Zerfas.
Zerfas. Sorry,
Steven
I'm so
Zerfas,
excited
yeah.
I can't even read. Zerfas. He runs Journey with an H, which is an organization that or a startup that gets people into Jhanas. So we're gonna talk about like everything. So first off, like let me just like lay everything out. So first off, before we before we started, we did like meditation for 5 minutes, like trying to like rev up the jhana, see if we can like get something going. So maybe something will happen, maybe not. I don't know. Very exciting. It's very Psychotechnologies live. So like stay tuned to see what happens. So we're going to talk about everything. So we're going to talk about like what jhanas are, why they're important, but like not too much about that because we've already talked about that. What I'm really interested in is like I think you're the first person that has like is running a business, like running a startup that is doing a specific psychotechnology. Like and not like a coach or like a therapist. I think like this is like it seems like you're trying to like build like a thing to do to scale up. So that is super cool. It's the dream that everybody's trying to do. So we're going to talk about that whole process and go through everything. I guess like the first thing is like to check in with you. Like how are you feeling right now? How's it going? What's your experience like right now?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I really enjoyed the meditation that we did to prep ourselves for jumping on the call.
So are you like feeling stuff? Like how does this work? Like what are you trying to like
Are you in the
find?
Jhanas right now?
I don't think I'm in a full jhana. We took about 5 minutes before uh, jumping in here, and depending on sort of how the day is going and where I'm at, that would be a very fast entry for me. I probably take more like 20 minutes on a given day, and then it really gets going and revved up at about 45. But it was really fun to move myself in that direction, and there's sort of a gradient, and it's a little arbitrary where you say like, okay, here is clearly an altered state, and so maybe we'll call it buzzed.
Is there
Okay.
so I have the map of jhanas in my head, but is there a particular jhana that you feel you're closer to in this moment, or like qualities of, or
Oh, the first. Yeah.
first
The
jhana? Okay.
yeah.
Do you want to like? How do you describe jhanas? How do you
Yeah. So the
teach it?
way yeah, I like to talk about jhanas as a positive feedback loop between attention and emotion. And that this is something that is actually familiar to everybody. Anybody who's had any experience with anxiety is intimately familiar with the fact that anxiety is a lot worse and a lot physiologically heavier 10 minutes in than when you first start. Your palms maybe get sweaty. There might be a knot in your throat. Similarly, you can learn to sort of navigate that positive feedback loop in a positive direction when you're starting with a little bit of practice, starting with a kernel like loving kindness or gratitude. And so the jhanas themselves progress from states of really high arousal, high pleasure, more like ecstasy or bliss, and span a spectrum to lower energy but still very pleasurable states, something more like a deep peace. So you can learn to take this positive feedback loop and navigate it across the spectrum of states from bliss to peace, and that can have some profound implications for mental health.
Huh. That's like a really nice way of explaining it. It's like you're like paying attention to your emotions and like I guess like you're saying like having like this loving peaceness and then it's just like creating feedbacks loops essentially.
Exactly. And in fact, at the highest level, those are our simplest instructions when we run our retreats. It's like we're going to take something like a loving kindness kernel, and we're going to do a number of tricks and a number of experiments to help us learn how to navigate the sort of pre-verbal and invisible positive feedback loops so that we can get started. And we'll take those all the way.
Cool.
Is there like? Can you give us a kernel? I want a kernel of loving kindness.
Oh, well, I guess what I mean by that is just like the felt experience itself. And so there's a bunch of different pointers and part of the process is figuring out the ones that might resonate the most with you. I happen to love the very classic phrases like, may all beings be happy, may all beings be healthy, may all beings be filled with joy and live a life without suffering. And with each one of those phrases, there's a little bit of a different texture or flavor in the nervous system. that sort of coalesces around that phrase. And so I'll use it to pulse, and each one of those phrases will be a little bit of have a little bit of a different result, but I'll sort of pulse it, and then it'll kind of fade down, and then I'll pulse it again, and then it'll fade down. But each time it fades down, it doesn't fade all the way quite down to base. And then at some point, it sort of hits a critical level, a critical threshold, and I'm able to sort of pulse the feeling simply by itself without the mantras. And this is probably one inflection point. It's probably around this point that I think I usually start to describe that as a jhana. But you can take that into quite deep levels of absorption, and obviously altered states.
Mm. Okay. I'm like kind of checking in with those, like playing with them a little bit. We suddenly went quiet because we're both trying it.
Yeah. Or another one, another kernel that, or a couple of phrases that I like that I think they actually ended up being significant for me at some point in my journey. We can talk what that arc looked like in a minute, with the mantras, praise God for my life, thank God for my body, mind, and God loves me. This was just a set of mantras that I had picked up during this was actually in the Finder's course, which is Jeffrey Martin's program from years ago. And one of the things that was so palpable for me was how the experience of praise, like the emotion of praise, was very much like an all in wonder and surrender. And it seemed to be associated somewhere kind of in my head or above or behind me. And then thanking, in this case, God for my body, mind, was much more of like a visceral gratitude, much more sort of in that heart space. And then God loves me was almost like, like what else could matter? Like God loves me. So it was a much more lower, more peaceful experience. And so what I thought was great about those mantras is so they teased just 3 simple phrases, teased out very palpably different textures in the nervous system. One being more praise and sort of a higher part of the body, one being gratitude and much more in the chest area, and one being peace and much more in the lower abdomen. And that those differences, I think, early on start subtly different, but it was enough for me to be like, holy cow, these are 3 different trailheads that go in like very different directions. And if I take the positive feedback loop and let them spiral, let them compound, let them run, I'm not going to end up a couple degrees off. I'm going to end up worlds apart. And thus I was introduced to not just one, but multiple altered states in meditation.
That's cool. We didn't have shown the 3 Dantes. It's kind of reminding me of that, like kind of like
3 centers.
Like 3 centers, like feel like to condense the chakra system from 7 into 3. You'd have like the lower, the middle, and the upper. And so you're using like the upper as praise, the middle as heart, gratitude, I guess.
In this case, yeah. At the time, I didn't know what chakras were. I didn't know what jhanas were. I had just stumbled across these phrases and was sort of playing with them on my own. Now I see exactly what you're saying. Like I still don't identify as like an expert on the chakras or some of these other systems, but some of these other systems just seem to have tremendous overlap with the jhana system in many ways.
I want to ask about that. So that moment going from not seeing these systems to seeing these systems, I think that was like the most fun, because I went from like there's no such thing as chakras to like obviously there are chakras. And for me that was just huge. And I'm curious what it was for you. Like what was it like for you crossing that threshold into seeing a new world almost?
Yeah. Well, there's probably like a short, middle length and long version. And if you'll indulge me, let me give you like the middle-ish to long version to just sort of contextualize like my experience into these states. I think that can be helpful, especially for folks who are coming from a place where it's like high degrees of skepticism. Like if you're sort of there just seem to be some folks who gravitate to this kinds of stuff right out of childhood and never looked back, and they're interested in like woo ideas and spirituality and magic. And I don't really think that was me. So it places it into context. So the story is I was in this terrible mental health spot about 5 years ago. I was breaking up with a co-founder and a girlfriend at the same time. And I went from 2 jobs to no jobs in a day, and had some other challenging personal dynamics. went on this meditation retreat as a bit of a Hail Mary. I just heard about meditation, but had very little experience. And I thought it was crazy that anybody would spend 10 days silent. And I did it one of these Goenka Vipassanas. But I was desperate. And so I did this retreat where I had 3 migraines in 8 days. It was just a disaster. I was like, at one point, I think I told myself, like, I need to go seek professional mental health help for the first time. I had quit or I had left like a pretty fast-paced sort of high-flying management consultant job, had loads of self-criticism in the system that I didn't understand and didn't see, and also studied economics and sort of kind of identified as a rationalist at the time. And on the very last day, out of desperation, I changed the technique, and it exploded on me. I just waves of euphoria, tears of joy and bliss, and then peace for like 60 minutes, wide open, spacious gratitude. And afterwards, I was like, what the heck is this? like this is the most blissful thing easily that's happened to me in over a year. And I just had 3 migraines in 8 days. Like this is the worst things maybe have ever been for me. Like, how is this possible? Surely this is a fluke. But if it's not a fluke, it changes everything. And so after the retreat ended, I didn't find the retreat sort of like rhetoric or teaching particularly compelling. And I also, for a few reasons, probably incorrectly, honestly, just concluded that I wouldn't be able to find any evidence of this kind of state or any reliable way of getting back into this state in books or like among teachers or in literature. I just assumed that like this thing that had happened to me, anything in the realm of like meditation or spirituality or theology was going to be sort of too woo, too fuzzy to like be all that actionable. So I just assumed I had to set out on my own. So I committed to sitting on the edge of my bed for an hour a day, no questions asked, for the next 4 months to see if I could recreate it even once. And to my like great surprise and delight, almost right out of the gate, about 10% of the time, after about 45 minutes, I would begin having this like obviously altered state experience again. And 10% of the time is still only 1 in 10 days. And it's after 45 minutes, so it's a long time. In some ways, this was even worse just for a little bit, because I was now like kind of for weeks scared that I had like tasted something amazing, that and all hell was still breaking loose. Like I was still breaking up my co-founder. I had no job. Like everything was rough. And so I was in this like period of like, what is happening? Like, will I ever be able to get back here? 9 out of 10 times I'm not able to get back there. It's calming and it's like nice meditation, but it's not anything that with like just like making me feel like everything in the universe is going to be okay, and like leaving me with a multi-hour afterglow and like tears of joy and euphoria. But 4 months later, it was 80% of the time. And
wow,
I was like, this changes everything. Like this is not a fluke. This is a skill. This is some sort of secret lottery I've never heard of. That seems to be the ticket to way better mental health. And so I doubled down and I did 2 to 3 hours a day, and I rotated the technique every 7 days, and helped with the finance course actually. At that time, around that time I had stumbled into it. And I was like, perfect. Like this is a way to get a sampling of techniques. And so I was coming in using that sort of like list of different techniques kind of with this experience of mine, thinking like, what I really want to be able to do is find a way to get back into this state reliably. And by the end of another 4 months, I could do it basically 15 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes on command, via multiple techniques. And somewhere in that period, I probably began to believe that chakras were real, because so yeah, at that point there was nothing more I wanted to share with family and friends, but that was a challenge in its own right, because it was either, Stephen, it sounds like if you're crying before work every morning, you might want to see somebody about that, or Stephen, like I don't have 10 months to run personal experiments and find out you're a freak. Like go have fun, but it's not for me. And so it ended up actually staying my secret for a couple of years until I found language to talk about it, really psychotech, to talk about it when I stumbled upon the Jhanas, and I was like, oh, this is it. Like this is exactly what happens in my experience. And so a new chapter sort of opened up from there.
Wow. I love the family, like, nah, we're good, thanks. You can stay over there with your weird shit.
Yeah. Well, I had no good answer in response to that, because at the time I like I did wonder like how much of a like freak situation I had fallen into. There wasn't really any super compelling evidence that it would replicate for me in the way that it replicated for others. I think Finder's Course was a good example. Like there were a lot of really interesting things that were happening there, and people were having some really powerful experiences, but a lot of them didn't seem to map to my experience. And like I didn't totally I feel like the locations thing that Jeffrey Martin was really big on was like kind of like some of it I was like, oh, like there's definitely some sort of persistent change that has happened here. Like my mental health has taken a big leap forward. And there's something here, but I'm struggling to map myself to a couple of these locations, and a lot of it is it doesn't really seem to fit into boxes. And so I thought that maybe my story was a fluke. But then the precision of the Jhana framework, particularly as described by Leigh Brasington and right concentration, to describe my like every like meditation experience I was having, just like it felt. I think what would have a phrase that I've heard, I think I picked this up from Romeo Stevens once, is like so much around the jhanas and the chakras and the like at a certain point in my life would have read like poetry, and then at some point they began reading like a technical manual, and that was a big difference. Also very inconvenient that it only reads as a technical manual after the fact, and but that's the problem we're actually setting out to solve.
Yeah, I also, in my memory, my experience was these things like chakras don't exist. I can't see them. They're not there. They don't exist. And then shortly after, well, obviously they exist because they're right there. I can feel them. Like, and equally, the technical manual was entirely apparent after I realized I had experienced it.
Yeah. There was this really interesting time period in which I think not that long after the jhanas had become deterministic, and I forgot one other thing that I should just say is that I was finding the jhanas so extraordinarily valuable. Like could not believe this was real, because not only was it felt like endogenous MDMA or something where I was getting high every morning. That was just the least interesting thing. The more interesting thing was the mentality of abundance that seemed to flow from having access to these states deterministically, and just knowing for sure that independent of conditions, I could move myself to like a profoundly blissful or peaceful state. And then secondly, I would drop into these states and then just grapple with the most like painful psychological thing I could come up with, like the death of a family member or a grandfather in this case, or like a challenging breakup or these kinds of things. So that was almost like too good to be true. But around that time period, I think I also picked up a book of Rumi poems, and I had this really interesting experience where I would like flip through a number of poems. Maybe like early in the day I hadn't meditated or something. It was after a long work day or something, and some of them would be like, okay, like some of this is like, I'm glad I'm glad somebody thought that was a good poem. But like, I don't know, this is like, what? Like, and then I would, and it would be like 20% of the poems would like really get me thinking. And then I would pick it up on a weekend after I did like a marathon meditation session from like in the morning or something. And I'd open up and all the poems were beautiful and just made perfect sense. And it was just like, of course, that's what you would like Rumi speaking about experience directly. And I began to realize that like, wait a second, like this mystic is speaking about speaking about the world in a way that really makes sense when you're coming from one of these like kind of more mystical states. And that sort of made Rumi come alive in a new way for me too.
Wow.
That's very cool.
I'm kind of curious of the like, so then how did you get to Journeys, to starting this startup company?
Yeah. So I mentioned that it largely stayed my secret for a couple of years, and it was kind of a groundbreaking moment when I read Right Concentration and was like, I got goosebumps. The hairs on my and my arms were tingling. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. And oh my goodness, this thing that I so want to share with friends and family more than maybe anything else in the world is actually something that has demonstrably been shared across thousands of people for thousands of years. Like this isn't just, it's not just that I'm alone. It's that this problem is inherently tractable. which is like these two things all at once was like, this was a great day. I was like, talk about a Jhana. Like, this book just set me off. So then though, the natural next question is, why on earth are these not at mega scale? Like, this thing that has just totally transformed my life, that has done a 180 on my mental health. Like one of the nice things about the finance course, they have you take psychometric tests, and like my, neuroticism and negative affect like plummeted, like things that I didn't think were possible to like to make meaningful moves on. And it was easy for me to stay relaxed and focused at work. I mean, the benefits just, the list just seemed to go on and on. So I was like, how on earth is this not something that I didn't like learn about in second grade? Like, how is this not like in the ethos? And I actually grappled with that question for probably the better, maybe over a year, piecing together different answers of like the historical political context, contributing to part of the reason why I don't think these are at scale. But the number one reason that just seemed obvious to me is, A, these are hard and counterintuitive states. They're hard because they're counterintuitive. They're actually not hard once you know what you're doing. And B, they're hard to verify. And that makes it fundamentally different from basically any other skill you're going to learn. From swimming to astrophysics, there's tight, accurate, clear feedback loops between you and an instructor or a mentor that make it, that just eliminate the confusion and allow you, and so frequently your rate of learning is a function of your feedback loop. You have a good instructor, they're giving you good feedback. And for something so pre-verbal and invisible, literally pre-verbal and invisible, the mechanisms of feedback are slow, are lossy, are rarely personalized. And so you're working in an environment in which it becomes very difficult to learn and transmit and scale in the same way that most other things that we learn to do can. And so that was where the obvious next step to me seemed to be like, okay, well, if we can solve this feedback problem, if you can make it much easier to verify, now you've got the mechanisms in place that could finally take this incredible gem, this like priceless discovery, to mega scale. And that's when I became obsessed with the tech and related neurotech and neuroscientific ideas. I said for basically a year, I like took 8 online courses and started contacting academics, taught myself how to analyze neural time series data, and was hacking on a machine here in the house, and got in touch with a number of people, including Katie Devaney, who was at Harvard, now at Berkeley, started the Berkeley Alembic with Michael Taft. And we sort of continued to like nerd out and run some early experiments on this. And at some point it became clear that there was a thesis here, which is like, a lot of the, this seems mostly to be a machine learning problem rather than a neuroscientific problem at this point. The way you might convince yourself of this is consumer grade devices have gotten a lot cheaper, even as they continue to be or gotten better in quality. B, breakthroughs in emotion recognition and for something like EEG using deep learning and machine learning have made it such that we can seemingly classify highly emotional states with a fair degree of accuracy. And then C, the literature for neurofeedback is a little spotty. And there are definitely some serious limitations, I think, in the literature, both in rigor and in some of the size effects. But there are 3 bright spots. And one of those, I think, is in advanced meditation. There's a way of looking at Brewer's work in which you're like, whoa, we have evidence that we can get a novice to imitate a master's brainwaves in under an hour when you're using, like on certain dimensions, if you're using the right tools. And so if you put all that together, you could see this as an engineering problem where it's like, we believe this is possible to find the right, get the right biosensor data while somebody's moving in and out of these states, and use that to feedback the sort of hard to verify mystery, and hopefully take the learning time down by an order of magnitude.
Okay.
Can you walk us through like some microcosm of that, like a specific problem that you solved, or because like you talked like very high level, like if we can get like something of like.
Sorry. So what I mean, like you can imagine a very specific product, like a way of bridging the feedback loop is, or putting a feedback loop in place where there wasn't one before, is you put a cap on a consumer grade EEG, you open up your app, you start following the instructions, you're listening to the music, and now the music gets quieter as you approach the goal state. And this gives you moment by moment personalized, better than words feedback, and furthermore can also give you a measure of progress. and this could be, you could elaborate on this in like an after the fact, or like an after session report. And this measure of progress will eliminate the risk that you give up before you succeed, because for many people, they could actually be trending towards jhanas and have no idea. So this is sort of like a specific. You could also imagine the instructions you're listening to change in real time based off of your brainwaves. So this is like a very simple, specific case in how neurofeedback could easily 10x or 100x the speed to enter into these kinds of states, if done well. The question is, how do you build that? And I'm happy to talk through sort of how we think about the process of systematically moving towards that kind of vision.
So I'm hearing you have tools to, within a certain amount of confidence, tell you which jhana someone's in, like a EEG cap that can be like, yeah, we think they're in 1, we think they're in 2. Is that
so? Yeah, where we are right now is we have
close to it.
Yeah, we're getting close. So what we have right now is an algorithm that with roughly 75% accuracy is able to detect whether or not somebody who's moved into the jhanas. Typically, this means the first jhana, relative to their sort of like calm prior meditation state. This was the way we arrived at this is in the first half of last year, we put together what we think is currently the largest data set in the world on the jhanas, over 100 hours of EEG data, about 30 or so subjects. There are a couple of other, and it was 64 nodes, and so it's a like fairly expensive and sophisticated system. We also collected things like pulse oximetry, heart rate variability. We had thermal cameras running. We did galvanic skin response. We had EMG and EOG. So like through a bit of a gauntlet there to cast our net wide, thinking that we would then go signal hunting in that data set. And the thing that was so exciting for us about the sort of 75% accuracy is that we're seeing that cross subjects. So we train the model on these subjects over here, and we then test it on a novel subject. And if you still have 75% accuracy, well above chance, that's suggesting that you're picking up on signal that is cross subject generalizable. And this was sort of in my mind, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, remaining fundamental neuroscientific uncertainties. Because the idiosyncratic and highly individualized nature of our brains means it may not be possible without an insane amount of data to pick up on the jhanas across people. And that would obviously be necessary in order to coach a novice in for the first time. So the novice is always going to be novel. So that's where we're at. We have a model that has this 75% accuracy across subjects. This was trained on experts. We then set out to make this thing working for experts in a sense, useful for novices. In order to do that, we needed to get a lot of novice data. And how are you going to get a lot of novice data? Spending hours and hours on your machines. You got to incentivize them. You got to run a retreat. You got to be teaching them the states themselves. We'll teach them old school, and while we're teaching them old school, we'll collect data. This led us to run our first retreats and I can talk a little bit about like how we designed the retreat and sort of how we went about it. But the sort of cutting to the chase here is that this is where we started seeing 65 to 90% success in getting people into jhanas in about a week. And we did that a lot faster than we were expecting. And so now we've been kind of pulled into running these retreats and really getting this dialed in and robust. There turns out there's a lot more low tech innovations that we think we can pull off, like online bookend the weekend retreat models where people don't have to take off work is something we're going to experiment with soon. But these kinds of things may be ways of scaling the jhanas already, number one. And then number two, if we've got like 50, 100 people a month coming through our retreats, we've got a fantastic lab. That is like an excellent next step for the R&D because you've got more resources, you've got more reps, you got more data that you can then slowly layer tech in over time. And that tech will get better and better. The retreats will hopefully get faster and faster. And then you can eventually imagine taking that from a service to a product. And now hopefully you've got your first ever productized psychotech. If we believe that this is the first ever, I'm not sure that's the case, but to your point earlier, Daniel.
It's the first. I think you're the first one on their channel, not the first one.
Also possibly the first one.
Great.
First technology that it can really nail the jhanas. But I'm also hearing there's a separate confidence you have in there of intersubjectively being confident that the jhanas are the same state across brains. Like someone in jhana 1 and someone else in jhana 1 are actually doing the same thing, which it would be hard. It's hard to verify from the like non-technical perspective because
that's right.
we're just guessing that we're doing the same thing. But
because we're just guessing. Yeah.
right, but it sounds like you've got that verification going. Like, yes, they're definitely the same thing.
Or similar enough that you
Uh,
can, close enough that you can then use third-party measurement to sort of help a novel person then sort of move in that
right.
direction.
I mean, that is also huge. That's like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's so this is one of the things that made the jhanas in particular so exciting to me. Is like there's a world where you sort of say, okay, this whole meditation thing has like totally turned my life upside down. And these like altered states and stuff that I have access to, I would love to find a way to scale this. But at that point, right, I still don't know what jhanas are. So rewind to this is like 2019 or something. And I've now been at it for a year. And there's still nothing more I want to share with family and friends. And I'm like, what on earth? How am I going to do this? Like really, maybe the best program that I am aware of is the Finder's course, like Jeffrey Martin's, and that's already like hustling along, is at some scale, probably asymptotically. There is like some pros and cons to that program, and I'm sitting there thinking like, man, like I would love if we could just have we just really just need one thing that seems like constant across people, constant across time, that makes for a very clear target, and then you optimize to get everybody in at that target. And then from there, they can explore the surrounding state space. They can explore their sort of individual preferences and idiosyncrasies. The other great thing about the Jhana framework is it seemed to be the case. It's like, whoa, here is an incredibly precise framework that describes my experience with even more precision than I have described it to date. And I've been at this now for 2 or 3 years. And it's stood the test of millennia. And it seems like there are thousands of people in the U.S. alone that have been taught by Leigh, and so this seemed to me like something that really seemed to have the cross-subject consistency from like a phenomenological kind of subjective report sense. It also seemed to me like being in these states that they were just so obviously related to very like common or universal like attractor basins in the state space of the nervous system, so to speak. Like one of the things that people so frequently talk about is once they've really gotten jhana access and determinism, is like these states are familiar. Like some percentage of folks talk about having experienced these in their childhood. Other folks are like, wait, like this is like what happened when I like learned I got into a prestigious university for like a day. But now I can learn to get into this state on my own, just using attention and emotion. So these things all contributed to me thinking like, this is the target. Like this is where we start. This is where we can kind of like build our measurements around. It's still a guess or an assumption. And like one of the things I'm paranoid about, even in our existing data set, is the extent to which somebody's phenomenology doesn't quite match up and they're like calling something a jhana. There have been a number of times in which we've, late in the game sort of discovered that people were using different labels. There have been a number of times where I was like, look, this person, is speaking passionately about their experience, but I just can't map what they're saying to our existing paradigms. And so we got to exclude them from the data set. Those first-person subjective phenomenological reports become really important because if this assumption doesn't hold, the whole thing topples over.
Does it though? Like, no, not to like tell you you're wrong or anything, but to like for clarification. If you have like the objective, like there's objective and subjective part. So like the subjective part, I guess, is like the person is experience and they're trying to share that with you. But if you have the objective data of like, yeah, your brain does this like pattern, like what kind of patterns? Like, does it do, like I've seen some of the EKG things and it does like different spikes or like smooths out over time. Like you can just call that something else and then say like, this is like, we're able, like our goal is to make your brain turn different, like do this thing. So then that becomes objective data. Like that becomes an objective state. And then you can kind of just drop all the
I feel like this is partly
history.
what Jeffrey did when he told them locations. He wanted to like not use previous paradigms and make his own so that he could like develop his own data.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what both of you are pointing at is something that we very much want to do. There becomes a point where like, if you have enough confidence that you're like, okay, this like repeatable, measurable, brainwave or like complex, like interesting pattern between GSR, heartbeat, and like some sort of like neural frequency. If that seems to replicate across all the jhanas, and everybody's first person subjective report in the jhanas. And you sort of pull that out in isolation, you're right. It could be actually that folks are still experiencing that in slightly different ways, or you could be pulling something out, like just that thing alone doesn't actually constitute the entire jhana experience. In fact, it's probably almost certainly the case that there's some sort of loss that happens if you were to pull that out, or there's some sort of like idiosyncratic difference that you're not accounting for. But now you've got something that seems to be common across all of these like seed people, the people in the seed data set. And now you can just start doing your best to sort of hyping people towards that measurement. And then if also is the case, when they arrive at that measurement, they're very close or they're reporting very similar experiences, you've got something that works. And you can use that then to get a lot more people at scale into these states. We, at the most fundamental level, aren't attached to the word jhana at all. We're not interested in defining exactly what a jhana is.
Your story didn't really start in Jhana. It started in the States, and then later finding the label of Jhana. So
exactly, and like what we think is so interesting and exciting is that there appears to be a community of people that are using shared language to take themselves into states that sound shocking, like too good to be true to the conventional narrative around mental health right now. Like the fact that you could have MDMA without the drug on command is literally too good to be true for certainly folks who are grappling with like mental health issues, but also people who are perfectly mentally healthy, but just like grappling with a little bit of stress here and there. And have never heard of these kinds of tools or psychotech. And so what we're interested in is like, whoa, there's a community over here with shared language and obviously positive deviance, like, outlier effects that are incredibly desirable, like way, way, way into the north side of the distribution. Let's just grab this like very special thing and take it to the rest of the population. And whatever labels are necessary to do that, we're going to lean into. But labels are labels. And we would rather, chase the impact rather than chase claims to what is a jhana or whether a jhana is a deep state or not, or getting into the jhana wars or this kind of thing.
So if I can just like reflect back, see if I got it. Like you're trying to like, there is a whole history of jhana wars as you call them, that you're trying to like not step into too much, which I definitely appreciate. And then you're looking for, I guess, like to me it's like I think like what I was trying to say before, which I didn't feel like it exactly landed, maybe is like you're starting off like searching for subjective data, but like because you have all this like neurotech, you're able to actually just do objective stuff, and so you can create like a different paradigm that's just based off of like what you see on the computer, essentially. Like like what are the feedback you're getting, and then trying to make people's brainwaves get to there.
Exactly.
Which is essentially based off of Jhana, which would be like that's the objective counterpart to the subjective experience of Jhana.
Yeah,
I kind of want to know how many retreats have you run so far, or how many people have you run through on retreat format, approximately?
Yeah, so
you're talking like 20 people, 100 people, 500?
We just finished our 6th retreat, and we're seeing about 15 people on like per retreat up until recently. That started to sort of like creep up. So we've probably done 80 to 90 people on retreat so far.
Nice.
And those numbers I think are about to jump, like start increasing faster, because we've basically been like giving notice about our retreats on like 4 weeks notice, because we're a startup and moving fast, and we're like, okay, we want to do this. When's the fastest possible time from now we can do this? But the February retreats we give a bit more advanced notice to. And so those numbers may throughput might creep up to 20 or 30 people a retreat.
Okay, and you said you're doing low tech as well. Is that like you have a Jhana teacher there giving basic instruction?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of low tech on these retreats. In fact, the retreats so far have basically been entirely low tech. And the way this has happened is we had our model. We're like, okay, we need to make this useful for novices. We need all this novice data the way I was explaining. And we're like, well, we need to run Jhana retreats. How on earth are we going to run Jhana retreats? Like we as a team actually all have sort of Jhana expertise. We're pretty regular Jhana meditators, like daily for all of us. But teaching seems to be a whole nother thing. Like the teachers who are well known seem to have spent like some of them like maybe a decade in apprenticeship. Like this, there seems to be this conventional wisdom that you need all of this tacit knowledge in order to be able to share these states. And so we were pretty intimidated and just figured, well, we got to do this. It's going to be maybe like not that great of an outcome, but maybe it'll be enough. And we're going to do our best. And the only way to kind of soak up tacit knowledge as fast as I possibly can think of is to get reps of deliberate practice. So for the first retreat, we had an expert teacher come in and co-lead it with us, with the idea being that we would give the interviews, but then they would give us feedback after every interview. And then the next retreat, it was online, and we had, I want to say like 5 or 6 teachers come. It's like a different teacher every day, and observe us giving the interviews. And then the interviewee, the student, would leave, and then the teacher would give us feedback. And so in the matter of 2 or 3 months, I think my co-founder and I each had done like 150 interviews with immediately followed by expert feedback. And so this cycle proved, I think, a really great way of, one, improving our confidence, but I think also improving the quality of our instruction, and ensuring that I think one of the happy effects here is not only did we get a fair amount of instruction from one person, but we got instruction from across teachers, and we could see, and now we can run simulations in our mind of like, okay, this teacher would actually disagree with this teacher on what to do here. And with these different schools of thought, we're now going to sort of chart our own course. And that's sort of how the Journey curriculum has been built.
Wow.
That's funny. It's such like a startup culture meets like ancient tradition. Like how fast can we iterate?
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, right? Like we're a tech company, and we're building towards what we think is going to be like a super exciting and extraordinary tech product. At the end of the day, what we really care about is using every principle, every idea that we can get our hands on in order to make this incredible, like I think priceless psychotech more accessible. And that reverse engineering cascades all the way from figuring out what the right ML algorithm is to use to figuring out how do we ourselves learn fast enough on this in this process in order to get 80% of our future students into the Jhanas, not just 60%. And so it's really this like ethos of reverse engineering that we want to take to every step of the puzzle. And I think in some ways this has been done before. In some ways, like the Buddha was a terrific engineer, a brilliant engineer. Also, by the way, the Jhanas seem to predate Buddhism, appear in Hinduism. They also share a lot of overlap with states and other mystical traditions. Michael Ferguson, one of the neurospirituality guy at Harvard, pointed out to me that the fMRI readouts of Mormons feeling the spirit, which is sort of a technical term in Mormonism, looked similar to the fMRI readout of Leigh Brasington in some ways, and so doing Leigh when he was doing the Jhanas. And so there's on multiple dimensions, it's possible. I think it's actually almost like I'm quite confident that there's a tremendous amount of overlap between some of these mystical states across traditions. What's exciting about the Jhanas is they're practiced deterministically. You don't, there's not like the sort of spontaneous or unpredictable grace of God that might be an important part of when you experience some of these profound states in other traditions. And we had access and relationships to sort of Jhana practitioners. But the sort of what I wanted to say is that there definitely appear to be just like fantastic, brilliant, and like incredible like technical developments that has happened in the past, ranging from actually a Jeff Martin quote is like, at one point in time, singing bowls were cutting edge technology, and like they were used really effectively, and the instructions of moving into these states are excellent, and like in many ways, and have stood the test of millennia. Now, today, we just have new ideas and new techniques and new tools that can be applied in the same spirit of making these states more accessible. And that ranges all the way from the ML algorithms on the one hand to like, the latest education teaching pedagogy that's coming out of like the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And we want to take all of that and throw it at the problem, because the stakes are too high to leave any behind or not take this to scale the way we could.
Well, because this is how you get shit done, right? Like you just take the good stuff and you put it together, and like you work properly. Right? You don't just like, only use a computer and like not use a whiteboard just because like you're of computer tradition. Like, why would you not just use all the tools that you have available to you?
Yeah, that's certainly the engineering mindset that like we are excited about and are taking to the process. I think in certain cultural contexts, that's there may be like other factors at play, either because of the ontologies that these states are often associated with, or the metaphysics that may make it such that some of these things are like more natural extensions than the other. There's something weird about using EEG and machine learning to get people into advanced meditative states, and that, so certainly it's never been done before, but it also might make some folks uncomfortable, and so we certainly aspire to that mentality.
Yeah, so like this is cool because it feels like you're sort of creating slash drawing upon, like you're drawing upon like traditions, like let's say wisdom traditions, you know, in the like startup community for like the frameworks that you're using for accessing these states. And but like the jhanas have never been done, and like so like these specific states are like not really, I think, part of the startup world yet. And so it's like you're kind of like also like forging like a new, I want to say you're almost like making like a new religion in a way.
A new spiritual access.
Yeah, like access the Holy Spirit, access God's proud of you, God loves you, God accepts you, and I will teach you like how to experience like the love of God through the power of psychotechnologies and neurotechnologies. And then when people ask you about it, you kind of come from this like startup tradition.
Well, one theory about religions is that they democratized access to spirit, right? Prior to organized religion, there was like shamanic religion, and the one oddball at the side of your village would kind of help you access things when you need to access it. But really, not everyone could access. Once you had larger religions at scale with a book, with instruction, ideally it would unify the world because everyone could read the same book or follow similar instruction to implying Christianity. But if everyone can follow the same basic guidelines, then everyone can kind of have access. But at this level, if we get the technology, we don't even need the religious dogma anymore. We can just have a like step 1, step 2, step 3. Here you go. Like everyone can have access to feeling way better about their existence in the universe and their contribution to society, simply because it is that easy. We just haven't been able to teach people that easily until recently.
Yeah. There's on this topic of creating a new religion, this is something that I am so excited about, and I think is also something that's worth reading very carefully. It's a very like flammable topic, and I think most of the flame comes from some subtle misunderstandings. So the first is like, let's put ourselves, let's sort of take it from different sides, and maybe you two can help me like enumerate the different sides that might have different reactions to this idea of creating a new religion. The first and obvious one for me is like blasphemy, like, or that's the devil, right there. Like we knew he was coming, sort of, and right, and like this is and this is something that like I want to be really careful about not overclaiming. Number one, nor number two, do I want to. I would love to find a way to share this with folks in a way that doesn't throw up those kinds of alarm bells, or doesn't throw up those kinds of risks. Not because I'm trying to sort of sneak in some sort of like devilish, like, I don't know, change in the world, but because I think this is we're actually on the same team. The average religious person who might respond to this idea of creating a new religion as blasphemy, this is the devil, we actually share a vision for finding a way to scale profoundly mystical, profoundly powerful, profoundly pro-social, and profoundly mentally healthy states. And one of the things that I think can be a very subtle point of misunderstanding is like, oh, this is being done in a weird container, or this is being done in a non-holy way. When in reality, if you look at the state, you're like, no, this state itself has the divine in it. Like this state can't be separated from all those divine qualities that you hold so dear. This is just yet another way, in the same way that like, singing bowls at one hand were useful. You know, the Catholic Mass has sort of changed its structure several times throughout the course of the history. The rise of like different church youth groups and the like could all be seen as like tools and technologies to find a way to share this really special experience at scale. And this is like an unusual one. If you're like growing up in, I grew up in Southern Indiana, and using EEG machines and machine learning to try to get folks into the states that many folks were practicing in church to some extent, would seem really foreign. And yet I think there's actually 99% commonality, and the 1% on the outside is actually harmless. So that's like one perspective. I think there's like another perspective where it's like, okay, religion has actually done a lot of harm for the world. We've got the Crusades, we've got all kinds of tribalism. I would love to see mystical states divorced from their dogma. And for those folks, I think the way that I want to like offer them this is looks a little like it's different. It's the same idea, same exact idea, but different rhetoric. To your point earlier, Elliot.
I think you probably gotta not call it a religion. that's one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think that
I'm the one
funnily
that
enough,
yeah.
I think that Buddhism does this a bunch. It says we're not a religion, we're just a meditative practice, and then they sneak their way into previously religious circles because it's non-conflicting with other religious practices. In a good way, they invite themselves in because they're not claiming to be a religious dogma or a religion at all, really. And then in other moments, they really do look a lot like a religion. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think about this stuff all the time, and I got like a completely different take that I want to run by you.
Yes. What's your take?
Yeah, so you're like, okay, like I don't want to fight you. I don't want to like, you guys, we're all doing the same thing. Like to me, it's like the thing that I would love to do, like the thing that I like, if I like the vision would be is to not say like, it's to just like come in and be like, okay, like you guys are into like Jesus and accepting the love of Jesus, and priests, you have trouble with your congregation, like to get them to actually well, like we can help you with that. Like let's teach you how to do that on a very like easy way, right? Like so like that's to me is like almost like the product is to just kind of like going to the different religions and being like, let's help you access your like your divinity, like however it is that you frame that.
like to support the feeling in touch phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think I would, I think I'll feel a lot more comfortable when I've had maybe a few more conversations with folks who are just sort of deeply, because I think to your point, Daniel, there's a way of doing what you just said, which makes a ton of sense. But there's also, I think, a fear like, whoa, like that's very presumptuous. You, Silicon Valley engineer, can tell me as a priest how to do my job. Like, and so there's something here about, I don't want to make any assumptions, actually, that what we have is, in fact, the thing that is so special to these folks. Almost certainly, it's not the case. It's almost certainly it's different. But to the extent to which we have shared dreams of like scaling some of these things, or the fact that we may share some assumptions, like, oh, if you have this mystical experience, this will lead you to Jesus Christ, or this will lead you to like divine love or whatever. These kinds of things, like, no doubt there's common ground here. But because like religious identities and things can be so flammably charged, I want to find a way to like proceed with like humility and openness to sort of and like learning the process. What is the right way? Should it ever come to be that we like cooperate or work with folks who are coming from a deeply religious place, that we can meet them where they're at and not presume that we have any of the answers.
I remain the eternal optimist. But
to be fair, I feel like I can talk a lot of shit because I'm not the one running your organization, so I'm allowed to like, I like it, embrace the inflammatory, just because like we're on YouTube and like that's the YouTube tradition, is to like.
I really like the line that if the Buddha and Muhammad and Jesus sat at a table, they just have a lovely time. There wouldn't be a war between them. They just like get along because they cared about doing their thing.
Yeah.
More than they cared about proving who was right. And that's optimistic for future cohesion amongst religious structures.
Totally. A related thing that I like to remind myself or find myself saying from time to time is like how valuable it is to want to be right, but not want to have been right. And just the same image that you just had of like Muhammad, Jesus, and Buddha sort of sitting around the table and just having a loving time because they care. so too do I want to find a way to get all the answers right here, without feeling particularly attached to what my current understanding of what's right.
Mm. So I got a question for you. Having run 6 retreats, roughly 90 people through jhanas, can you see when someone is in a jhana? Do you have a sense, a clue for yourself?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's really obvious because they come in just like glowing and or maybe they're crying and so they're like, oh, there's a few things that we rely on to, and there's a few things that we rely on to sort of count something as we move somebody into a jhana. The first is we like a question that's like, you know, this state that you're describing, that you're experiencing, that it seems like it was very pleasurable. You know, was that like the most pleasurable thing that happened to you this hour, this day, this week, this month, this year? And if they're in the sort of like 6 months to a year category, or they're like in that, like, you know, sometimes we get folks who will be like, yeah, you know, it's only like a month, but like, yeah, if you took out drugs, then like, yeah, easily in over a year. Then we also sometimes include that. And so that ends up being one bar. Another bar is, at this point, we've done well over 100 interviews of folks who have been in and out of the jhanas, expert meditators who have clocked thousands and thousands of hours. And then increasingly, the folks who we've taught to move into the jhanas. And so there's this like pretty well, like you can debate how well defined it is. And we get a little bit into this like poetry versus technical manual, but there's also just really common repeatable characteristics. And so if their phenomenological description is also matching that, and they're talking about this, really this experience being the most pleasurable thing that's happened 6+ months at a time, then that's when we say, okay, we think we got this person in jhana.
Can you see it?
Like visibly, like
intuition. Yeah. Can you like tune into other people's states and tell if they're there?
Yes, although I don't like to rely on that.
Right, fair.
It actually would be worth an exercise for me to maybe try to guess based off of my, like, maybe one of the next retreats or something. I'll just be keeping tabs of that and then see to the extent to which that maps people's first person reports.
I mean, this is just one of my crazy theories, but to the extent that you can see someone who looks depressed and be like, that person is depressed. You can also see someone who looks like they're in a jhana, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever. Be like, that person looks like they're in a place.
Yeah, totally. And I think almost nobody would disagree with you on that. Like, if there's one of the things that we're most worried about actually in our data is that people smile in the jhanas. And so they, and smiling creates muscle signal, which can be hard to parse from neural signal and the noise. And so because people so consistently smile, and because they smile basically throughout the jhana, it's the thing that we're most worried about is creating a smile detector instead of a jhana detector. And so we've actually taken a number of steps that go way above and beyond the typical EEG literature to try to control for muscle artifact in a more rigorous way. And so if we're doing that in our data, then surely, like, you know, you can visibly just see, like, okay, well, they have a massive smile, they're probably in jhana 1. And if they have a medium smile, they're probably in jhana 2. But and then it's also
good,
yeah,
the big smile that they do when they're like, they're kind of just like, but when people are like really blissed out, they just got this like their whole face just goes like crazy. Like
it certainly can. Yeah, it depends a bit by person. But yeah, there are some folks who they're jhana, it's just no question. Like so. And this is actually this is so true that this is actually, even especially in the TWIM school of thought, part of the instructions. It's like there's so there's some TWIM retreats that have been run. So TWIM is tranquillism, insight, meditation, and it's one of 3 traditions that we've taken most of our inspiration from in crafting our jhana instructions, along with the Ayakam and Brasington and Tanisara Bhikkhu and Robert Bea. And some of their retreats they run, there's 2 rules. It's like any effort you think you're about to like exert towards this cause, like cut it in half, and then probably cut it in half again. Like if you're anywhere with like close to, if you're within a mile of effort,
like, take it easy, bro.
Exactly. and I will repeat this to you 100 times, and you'll probably still take it too hard. But and then the second thing is smile all the time. And there's actually really good thinking here, which is that there's a 2-way street between the, like, what's happening in your body and your subjective experience. And there's some clever studies have done with like how you hold a pencil in your mouth. And if you hold a pencil in a way that forces you to smile versus forces you to frown, you'll have different subjective experiences while watching cartoons. Similarly, if you like kind of paralyze folks that report like cartoons are less funny, there's like other ways in which you can get at this fact that there is a bit of a two-way street. And so it's to your question, Elliot, not only is it like quite easy in some ways to tell whether or not somebody's in a job from a purely intuitive sense. Also, do I have like a fair, like, feel like a lot of times in my personal experience, I'm successfully doing this. And the like two-way relationship between what's happening when you're smiling and in your body and your posture when you're in these states is so strong that it's in the traditional instructions.
I have my favorite one, just to add to your pencil experiment, is to like go like this. Good. Right. So there's a two-way street with this particular like furrowed brow, which is that you start to feel confused after a while. Like, why the hell am I doing this? But like some of that confusion is because I made you do a silly thing, but some of it is just genuinely like, oh, my brow is making the confused face, therefore I must be confused.
Yeah.
I always laugh when people play along with that.
Yeah, it's like those feedback loops you were talking about earlier. So like you're creating like a semantic one.
Yeah, exactly. Another version of those. Yeah.
All right, so can we do some Jhana now?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I am happy we could like sit here and meditate. I guess I don't know how interesting or useful it's going to be for listeners. I could also, I guess, like riff on like a 5 or 10 minute guided Jhana instruction, which might be of interest to listeners. And then maybe it's sort of with the caveat that like really where I think the juice is when you're a novice is when you're sort of sitting and collecting for an extended period of time. It's not always the case. Some people move fast, so we can do it. It's just it's different than like a non-dual sudden pointer where the thing can happen instantly.
Okay. I mean, I'm also interested in like, so in my mind, I have like instructions for Alexander technique, which in a map in my mind kind of maps directly to fifth jhana. There's like a spacious awareness. There's like a container of awareness.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you feel like that fits, because that's often a very quick pointing out instruction.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is like you really can have jhana pointers, and basically in each direction, and they can have like instant. It can sort of be like that's sort of like the view you take. The difference is then it can take some time, and it certainly takes some collectedness for that that positive feedback loop to really have done.
Really deepen and get in like someone to have a really, really, really profound state is going to take a bit.
Yeah, it's not like a realization. It's like there's like you're like generating chemicals or something inside you.
Yeah. Well, here's another mental model that I think may be useful here. So when we talk about concentration and really like introduce our meditation instructions on retreat, I really don't like the word concentration at all. I think it's like a mistranslation. It's a much better translation in my mind is collectedness. And the reason I like that word better is because in English, concentration has this often this like quality of effort to it. We sort of associate it with like, okay, we're like batting our attention into a narrower place, and finally it's going to stay right here or something. What I like about collectedness is this other model. It's like, imagine like rather than me or I making a whole lot of sense, I am a collection of a whole bunch of different modules. And these modules are usually very simple and well-meaning. And they range from I'm hungry to I want to look good on this podcast to like I don't want to be in conflict with my colleagues at work or something. And you can imagine 1,000 of these. And most of the time it's like herding cats. They're just like running all over the place. Or like I frequently imagine them as like U9 soccer players. And there's a couple things that flow out from this model that I think are really nice. One is it just makes no sense to be a drill sergeant with a bunch of U9 soccer players. Like obviously the way to get a U9 soccer team to sort of like come together is through like compassion and be like, oh, come here, little Steven. Like, thanks for trying to play defense, but we need someone to play offense now. Like, oh, you stubbed your toe. Like, here, have a break. Like, is way better than like trying to beat up a U9-year-old to like hustle harder. The second is that really where the magic happens is when like all of the modules are paying attention, are like unified, are genuinely collected. They're like brought into the activity. And so there's actually a great image in the Mind Illuminated of like a bunch of it's cats running around a room, and it's like, come on, y'all, we're meditating. And then like the next page, it's like hold up a can of tuna, and suddenly all the cats are like all eyes on the tuna. And this is another way in which I think the jhanas can be a great example of something that really does a great job of collecting you, because you get this positive feedback revved up, and more of your brain quiets and allows you to sort of like zero in on the pleasure, which then allows you to look closer, which allows you to get quieter, which allows you to look on. And this thing takes off. So with this in mind, the implication is you can have like the jhana view right away. And then a matter of time, as everything sort of settles into place and more of your mind deactivates and really kind of coalesces around the jhana. Another way is if your mind is already very quiet, calm, kind of deactivated, and then you throw in like a jhana view, it can be like a seed crystal that takes off. In this case, since I've been talking for the last hour or so, I'm probably not quite in that like seed crystal fertile environment. But we could like do a little bit of a guided meditation and sort of take ourselves towards that collected terrain.
Is there like, are there any relational jhana practices that we can like almost like a relational pointing out or something?
Yeah.
The best idea is
Yes.
we could do something like what Jeff and Martin would be like group awareness, or
right,
or Vince Horn and Kenneth Folk, I think would call like multiplayer meditation or social noting. And I think we could, well, especially because both of you have jhana experience, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we could take turns, just sort of like noting our experience with special like attention on the more jhanic factors, and sort of trying to all of ourselves in that direction at once.
Do we want to? Are we aiming for first jhana? Is that what, or second jhana, or?
Yeah, let's do first or second. Because first and second are sort of like, first is like euphoria, first loving gratitude sort of thing, second, and then second is like loving gratitude, happiness first, and euphoria second. I sometimes actually head for both at once and then end up dropping into one or the other depending on which way I want to go.
Okay, so maybe aiming for one, and then if we end up in two, we also end up in two. So yeah. All right, and we're like noting if we notice any jhana type quality that we're sharing it with the other two people here. Is that
or so let's hang on actually real quick. I also wanted to just make sure how we are on time. Cool. So I have 25 minutes still. So we could either do this as the last thing, or we could do this and then come back on and talk for a little bit longer.
About like 10 minutes, and then we'll see if we found anything useful to conclude.
Yeah, sounds good. So let's do that. There's maybe a couple things for anybody who's listening to this recording in the future that might be, or anybody who's live right now, that would be good context. So my preferred jhana instructions are to use loving kindness and to use what in the tradition is called the 6 R's. What for anybody who's familiar with like Michael Taft or similar might be dropping the ball, or maybe very most commonly is open awareness, where you're just like kind of letting it all in and just seeing what comes up and letting it go. So 2 parts, right? Like loving kindness and like the 6 R dropping the ball or open awareness. The question is like, okay, wait a second, aren't loving kindness and open awareness 2 different practices? And it's like, yes, but they actually can be very similar. So what I would suggest what I do suggest to novices is that we find a phrase or an image or some sort of like meta scaffolding, some sort of loving kindness scaffolding that we can use to pulse the feeling. And now we're going to kind of pulse the feeling, but we're going to be on the lookout for any distractions, any things that sort of like pull ourselves off from the feeling. And that's where like this like open awareness kind of dropping the ball comes in, where it's sort of we maybe even extend a little bit of loving kindness to that, but we just sort of kind of we release it. There's an additional step in the TWIM school, which I think is clever, which is take a moment to physically relax the body, and then come back to the loving kindness. And you'll know you're doing this well if you kind of slowly like things sort of kind of get wider and wider on you, where it's like almost impossible to be surprised. you're like just so wide open and accepting that anything could come in. And yet, in the absence of anything coming in, you are pulsing your loving kindness crystal, seed crystal, here. So that's sort of like kind of the crux of the instructions.
Like you're like almost like if you're like concentration awareness, like concentration on loving kindness and then awareness of openness.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And then you'll know, something will come in, some sound will happen in the distance, or some thought will come up and like kind of begin to take you away. And you'll immediately drop that ball. You'll immediately release and relax and kind of welcome it in. And there's no pushing anything away. Another way of thinking about it is like, okay, each distraction you can think of as an opportunity to further gather all these different modules into some sort of big collected place. It's like, there's another part of me that I didn't have the chance yet to welcome in. Like, come here, like let's meditate. Oh, come here, we're meditating now. Come with me, we're meditating. So this kind of experience. So this is sort of the loose idea. It takes a lot of again, the poetry versus technical manual thing takes a lot of dancing to sort of figure out how to get right. What we're really looking for is this like loving kindness dimension to kind of grow and grow on its own. Separately, the social noting or the group awareness are people that you do, or meditation things that you can do in a group. You may, for example, do your best to describe in a word or like just a half sentence what awareness is. This can be this is group awareness from more of like Jeffrey Martin, the Finder's Course. And this awareness is incredibly hard, if not impossible, to describe. But the social aspects can be really valuable because you sort of hear how other people are choosing to describe it. It's also instant and in the now. It's immediate. You're not saying awareness is like, and then insert metaphor. It's like, no. Awareness is like open, spacious, like accepting, these kinds of things. And that going around in a group like that can really sort of bring the whole group into kind of use the social experience to create a more intense meditation experience. And so the idea of using social noting or jhanic noting, in fact, Vince Horn recently did this at one of our retreats, was to take this group environment and apply it towards the jhanic factories. And so you may just do your best to explain awareness. If you're experiencing a distraction at the moment in which it's your turn, you may like release or relax or say something along the lines of like dropping the ball. And all other things being equal, you may then use your turn to note one of these more positive, pleasant, more jhanic states of mind. Does that make sense, Daniel?
Yeah. Just want to clarify, the dropping the ball thing is not super familiar with. The technique I think I usually use for this is like if a distraction comes in, like you kind of like accept that. You accept the distraction and like you can feel good about yourself that you've like something was going to pull you away, and then you let it come in. And so like there's always like a good feeling there. And then so like sharing that feeling of almost like how you're relating to the distraction acts as like the concentration object, like I guess it's like, which is like essentially like loving kindness for yourself. And you're also like getting to balance that with awareness and the acceptance of everything. Does that make sense? And I don't know if that's the same thing that you said.
It was the first part that you were like almost like proud of yourself for recognizing the distraction.
Yeah. So like there's a good feeling there. So you can just like share that feeling, and then everything's welcome, and you're also like not polluting the space.
Yeah, so I like that. The thing that I think there can be a subtle anti-pattern if you're really leaning into the pride of feeling good is for catching yourself in distraction is like subtly sort of reifying this narrative that the distraction is bad. What I like about this sort of idea of like this collectedness is that every distraction is an opportunity. It's like, like that was
like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, like that you're like, and then like that feels good. So that's what you're sharing.
Yeah, exactly. And in that case, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Like I was just like sort of throwing out a bunch of things. There's like a bunch of ways it could reify into like being like into like words that are expressible, essentially. But yeah, I guess with us it's like we can just do like, it feels good, like And like that's almost like you're expressing that is like that's almost representative of the distraction because it's like the relationship with the distraction.
Yeah, I think that I think all that checks to me.
Okay, good. I like that feedback. Thank you.
Great. So if we want to do social noting, let's just go like Elliot, Daniel, me for this is for anybody who's never seen this before, this will look odd and will feel odd, certainly the first time you do it, because of the social anxiety and social pressure of doing it right. Like this is sort of a weird thing to be doing in a group. But that's actually also part of the experience. It's sort of like learning to see how that changes the experience. And then as you sort of settle into a rhythm, in the same way, like if you've ever done eye gazing, I know Joe Hudson's big into that, or like there was the 36 questions to make anybody fall in love in New York Times a few years ago. And the last one was just look in each other's eyes for 4 minutes. And that is very nerve-wracking at first, but then you sort of settle into a place where you recognize the value of the experience. So too, I find that typically the case for me in something like social meditation. So for anybody who's at home watching this or who wants to then try this down the line, know that just like eye gazing, the discomfort is part and parcel with the experience at first, and then you kind of settle in.
Cool. Should I launch with a note? Okay, I'm just gonna do it.
And we're noting happy things. I forgot what we're noting.
First jhana, heading towards first jhana.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to just generic group awareness instructions, sort of like explaining like what is awareness, but give yourself like upweight the positive qualities of mind.
I'm noticing some sense of excitement around this practice.
I am super happy to be here.
So traditional, well, I shouldn't say traditional, but the noting experiences that I'm familiar with will frequently just be a
Just the one word.
It's like one word, or maybe like a 3-word phrase or something. And there's no subject object. There's no it's much just a descriptor.
Oh, just like student stuff, like just like it's like literally just noting, like just like seeing, hearing, feeling.
Yeah, well, seeing, hearing, and feeling are the contents of awareness. So this is the thing. We are using social noting in this very particular purpose, which is like the positive qualities of mind, which is deviating a little bit from purely just describing awareness. But I'll tell you what, why don't we just do like a minute of just trying to describe awareness, sort of get the gist of what like the original kind of awareness social noting experience is, and then we will just see if we need to at all. It might already be trending towards the first jhana. But we'll see if we need to at all make it trend towards the first jhana. So, so I'll start. We'll do the same order, but I'll start. And
I've done so many variations on this. I can't remember what one was the original.
Oh yeah, I shouldn't even use the word original. Who the heck knows? Just the one that I thought we were all like kind of using as a starting point, which I learned first in Jeff Martin's Finder's Course, Group Awareness sort of thing. So, spacious,
Open,
smooth,
accepting,
slow,
smiling,
vast, and open,
clear,
relax,
unconditional acceptance,
Present.
Opening.
Deep.
Beyond.
Action.
Pervasive and penetrating.
Still.
Expansive.
Kind. Generous.
Expansive.
Warm. Warm.
Warm. Unconditionally accepting. Wide open.
Sharp.
Expanding.
Loving and excited.
Alone.
Love.
Both excited and at peace.
Calm.
Strong.
Wide open. Surrender.
Present.
Acceptance.
Aliveness. Ecstatic.
Excitement.
Um,
Wide open. Celebration.
Warm.
Peaceful.
Earnest. Wide open.
Heartfelt.
Acceptance.
Joy.
Ease.
Spacious.
Kind. Delighted.
Refreshing.
Love.
Let's end there because I'm gonna have to go here in a minute. If anybody finds themselves listening to that part of the recording, they could insert themselves in that loop. Maybe they go right after me or something. The other thing I'll call out is I'm guessing that looks pretty like non-interesting and or like cause for skepticism from the outside. One of the things that I think is just so important and something that many of us have to unlearn if we're going to succeed in making use of psychotech towards the jhanas is your expectations, beliefs, and like the lens you choose to see the world around you in many ways shapes the available state space of your experience. I think there's some really good like reasons why this may be the case coming out of predictive processing and theories in neuroscience. But something like studies where you when you're walking down the street and a lion crosses the street and everybody sees a dog until they're like right in front of it, and like the sense data just overwhelms their priors because why would there be a lion in the middle of the street? This kind of effect can limit the sorts of states that you're allowed to enter into, that your system will physically enter into during a meditation experience. This is also why I think people of faith and people of who are just sort of like excited to to wave their rainbow flags and be like, where's all the love, like can have a much easier time entering into these kinds of states than those who are technically trained or who are coming in expecting an answer or expecting some sort of like evidence that in fact this is all like bogus. The so much of like technical training and getting stuff just right is about converging and like really zeroing in on an answer. And so much of learning into, I think, mystical states is about feeling what it's like to surrender, mental surrender. It's like the feeling that allows you to change your mind. It's the feeling that allows you to say sorry to a loved one and mean it. It's like the feeling of the mental move that allows you to walk through the redwoods and be bowled over by its awe and wonder and allow that tear to come to your eye as opposed to sort of ruminate on whatever challenge is currently happening in your world. And so there's this great Naval quote, I think something about like how important it is to have like positive inclination of belief. And whenever you're engaging in some sort of like, I forget what he calls it, but I'll call it psychotech. It's like if you read Krishnamurti or if you read Eckhart Tolle, and you're coming in there with your Stanford neuroscientists, like, I need this thing to be chiseled out precisely. That's very different than if you come in thinking, I would like to really understand what this guy's experience is, and how do I like surrender myself into his worldview. So that I think is a principle maybe I should have led with earlier about the value of navigating any psychotech, this included.